Hey friends, welcome back to Faith It Till You Make It. Last episode, we talked about reveal, about bringing things into the light, about naming what's been hiding in the shadows. And if you actually took that seriously and not just nodded along, there's a good chance you might be sitting in a weird place right now. Previously, I told you all about my toxic people-pleasing behavior coming to light, and I sat in a very dark place for a long time afterward. It wasn't something as simple as, hey, Rachel, you have a problem. It was more like, hey, you have a problem, and it's showed up this way, and that way, and this other way, and it's literally the result of hundreds of problems in your life. As if Mary Poppins was pulling everything I've ever hated about myself out of her magical bag. And it's because revelation feels powerful. But living with what God reveals is where things get really uncomfortable. And not the kind of uncomfortable that you make a big deal out of. It's also not the kind of uncomfortable that you post for engagement or attention on social media. I'm talking about the quiet, disorienting discomfort where you think, oh, I see it now, but I don't know who I'm supposed to be next. It's the kind where you're spiritually awakened but emotionally confused, and suddenly everything feels so loud except for God. That was me. And now that I knew my toxic people pleasing was set up in a way to completely destroy me, it felt like I gave a whole bunch of my baggage to God, but instead, He made me hold it all myself, and I had no idea what to do with it. And so today, we're not talking about what God reveals. We're talking about what happens after. Who you are when the mask comes off and the scales fall from your eyes, how to live changed without scrambling to become someone else, and why God doesn't rush identity reconstruction even when we beg Him to. Here's something that the church doesn't always prepare us for. Revelation happens quickly, but integration happens slowly. God can expose something in a moment, a belief, a habit, a fear, a pattern. But living with that truth takes time. We've all heard of the fear responses, right? Fight, flight, or freeze. Well, one that is less talked about but quite common is fawning. That's my fear response. The whole concept of fawning is to appease or people please to avoid conflict. It introduces self-sacrificing behaviors in an attempt to stay safe. And in some cases, it will get you out of danger. But in most cases, it's going to create danger. In my life, this has shown up in all manner of ways, and in some very scary cases. Like, let's pretend a person with predatory behavior will manipulate their way into dominance over me, and instead of setting a boundary, I just excuse their behavior as something that I did to myself. If this sounds familiar and slightly uncomfortable, just stay with me. This isn't about diagnosing you, it's about understanding how God heals us patiently. When I finally learned that my fear response is fawn, I thought I could change it. I thought that all I had to do was take action to make it all go away. But acknowledgement didn't change my behaviors. And we often assume that once God reveals something, the next step is immediate action. We have to fix it. We have to cut it off. We have to change it immediately, and we have to become better. But biblically, that's rarely what happens. The Israelites were freed from Egypt in one night, but they wandered for 40 years. Revelation will remove the blindfold, but it does not instantly retrain your nervous system and your habits or your identity. And when we don't understand that, that's when we start to panic. Knowing that I was an appeaser and not being able to stop it immediately made me feel like, oh, I am destined to be this way. I am unchangeable, I'm irredeemable, and I'm just going to forever allow situations I am in to risk hurting others I love because, well, I'm spineless. Once things are revealed to us, we'll start asking, why do I still feel the same? Why isn't this resolved yet? Why didn't God fix this when He showed it to me? But God revealing something isn't Him saying, now hurry up and become different. It's Him saying, hey, now we can finally walk honestly. And that truth is beauty in a turd sandwich. But that truth doesn't lead us to clarity. It leads us to identity. Clarity will answer our questions, but identity answers how we are supposed to live. After revelation, most people fall into what I call this identity gap. You're no longer who you were, but you're not yet sure who you're becoming. And then that gap can be deeply uncomfortable because the old version of you had scripts, it had coping mechanisms, you had a role to play, and there was predictability in it. Even when they weren't really healthy, they were familiar scripts for you. And when God reveals something, He doesn't just remove behavior, He often removes how you've been surviving. So if you've survived a traumatic childhood by fawning your way through that life, and then something scary happens later, all of a sudden, your defense mechanism has become the thing that will only breed more destruction. But you haven't had time to learn new behaviors that keep you surviving. And suddenly, you don't know how to respond like you used to. Your old instincts, they start to feel wrong, and your spiritual autopilot shuts off. And that can feel like you're failing, but it's not. It's just the transition. And this is why so many people rush to rebuild this new mask once the other one's fallen off. They want a healthier mask, a more mature mask, or a redeemed mask, but it's still just a mask. It's not the real you. It's not the truly redeemed you. And we do this because we feel pressure to immediately appear healed, insightful, or spiritually impressive, even though we're probably still hiding, just with a different mask now. When I realized that fawning didn't have to be my only response, I felt such grief. Because if I can't be people pleasing, then it meant I was going to have to say no to people that I love. It meant that I was going to have to shut down and people might not like me. And in my head, if I'm not pleasing people, then people are not pleased with me. I wasn't sure I wanted to risk the parts of fawning that built relationships solely for the risks that it came with, especially when it was all I knew and I thought it served me more than it hurt me. That in between space can really feel unsettling, but it's not accidental, and it isn't something that God is going to rush you through. Here's the most difficult truth. God cares more about who you are becoming than how quickly you appear changed. We want God to reveal something and then fast track us to some healed version. But God wants us to inhabit the truth and not just perform it. He's building a new house for us, not telling us to go live in a house with no walls. And building a house takes time. Identity isn't going to change through intensity. There's no amount of strength in hammering, cutting, plastering, or even commanding that will build that house. Identity changes through safety and repetition and waiting for the next stage to happen. That's why God often slows things way down after revelation, because rushed transformation is going to create a very fragile faith. And a rushed house will shatter to pieces the minute a storm hits. But God is more concerned with whether the house can stand than how quickly it looks finished. If God immediately replaced every coping mechanism the moment He exposed it, most of us wouldn't survive that kind of vulnerability. Instead, He stays close to us. He repeats truth, and He allows you to practice living without the mask, just slowly. This is sanctification. It's not behavior modification or a spiritual glow up. It's God patiently teaching you how to live as yourself without fear. He has said, it's okay that you're not a master of it yet. We will get there together. And He isn't going to be mad at you stumbling through it. But I know when we don't understand God's pace, then we often try to speed things up ourselves. And that's where things get really messy. One of the most dangerous moments after revelation is overcorrection. We have this urge to cut everything off, burn it all down, make drastic declarations, announce your transformation publicly. And sure, sometimes that's obedience, but often it's just anxiety. When I was exposed with my toxic people pleasing, I immediately did a sharp turn of the wheel and started to take myself out of situations with people. Because if there are no people, I can't get caught up people pleasing. Duh. I basically solved my problem by becoming a monk. Very healthy. Highly recommend. 10 out of 10 for isolation, 0 out of 10 for spiritual maturity. I started to ignore people. I started to mistrust everyone's intentions, and I put myself in isolation. I felt like I couldn't participate in life anymore. If I found myself in a social situation, I was completely different. I didn't want to joke around like I used to. I would respond super defensively about everything, even when it didn't make sense. And I just completely lost myself. Overcorrection is what we do when we're trying to regain control because control feels safer than vulnerability, even when it costs us peace. But God doesn't invite us into chaos that's disguised as holiness. Just because we rush to fix it after God has convicted our hearts, it doesn't mean it's holy. Often it's just our fear of trying to regain control. Jesus didn't expose people and then rush them. He stayed. He walked with them, and then he let transformation unfold. Look at Peter. Jesus exposes Peter's denial before it happened, and Peter still denied him. And Jesus still stayed with him anyway. He walked with him, and he let his relationship with him reveal truth over time and never demanded instant perfection. If the change that you're making feels frantic, fear-driven, or fueled by shame, just take a minute and pause. Jesus has given you permission to slow down, integrate slowly into the identity that he is calling you in. God is not going to heal you through panic. That old version of you, the panicked and anxious version of you, doesn't fit anymore, but the new one hasn't formed yet, so now you're left in the middle. The mask has been removed, and it feels like you've been left without a script for what's happening next. But that's where faith gets real. When the mask comes off and you lose your script, you don't always know how to respond or what to say and what version of yourself to show up as. And that can be pretty scary. But that's where real faith begins. Because now you're no longer managing perception, but you're given the opportunity to learn discernment, to lean into what God is trying to show you. You're learning how to ask, God, who am I here? Instead of, how do I need to appear? I remember when my people-pleasing mask came off, I started to naturally lean into God so much more because I often found myself asking him to guide me in these uncomfortable situations. I started to speak less and listen more because I was learning. And if I messed up along the way, I just asked God to show me where it all went wrong. This is slower, it's messier, it's less impressive, but it's honest. And honesty is where God actually shapes our identity. Just don't confuse honesty with living exposed. Not everyone gets access to your process. Here's a truth that I hope sets some of you free. Healing does not always require an audience. One of the biggest mistakes we make after God reveals something is assuming that honesty means access for everyone, but it doesn't. There's a difference between living without a mask and living without boundaries. And confusing the two can actually slow your healing instead of deepen it. Not every person in your life needs to know what God is doing in you. Not everyone is safe with your story. And not everyone is mature enough to hold something sacred without trying to manage it, fix it, judge it, or even spread it. Jesus understood this. There were moments when he healed someone and then explicitly told them not to tell anyone, not because he was ashamed or embarrassed, but because he was wise. He knew that timing mattered, and he knew that crowds can complicate intimacy. And he knew that premature exposure can turn healing into pressure. Living without a mask doesn't mean narrating your process in real time. It means you're no longer hiding from God, even if you're being selective with people. And that distinction matters. I made the mistake of oversharing my experiences in healing to some of the wrong people. And all it did was create more feelings of discontent and went directly against what God was trying to say to me. And then the next thing I knew, my so-called friends, they would weaponize my boundaries against me. Well, Rachel, you said you weren't going to let that happen, but you did. So maybe you don't really want to heal. Or when a family member said, I need help, but I know not to ask you for it. All that did was spark shame and guilt in me. The whole time, I thought I was just asking for support by sharing my process. But that's not what happened. Some of us tend to overshare because we're looking for reassurance. We want someone to confirm that we're still okay, that we're still loved, we're still accepted, but reassurance isn't the same thing as healing, and crowds are not the same thing as community. God often does his deepest identity work in quiet and protected spaces. And this is where wisdom comes in. You have to ask yourself, if you're going to share this process and this journey with someone else, is this person safe or are they just available? Do they have the maturity to hold this without reacting? And am I sharing from a place of clarity or from a place of anxiety? It's not that boundaries are secrecy, they're just stewardship. And stewardship doesn't mean disappearing, it means discerning. They protect what God is forming before it's fully strengthened. And sometimes the most faithful thing that you can do after a revelation is to let it stay small, private, and nurtured instead of public, fragile, and misunderstood. It's not that you're being dishonest by choosing discernment. You're being wise. So if you're wondering what is supposed to look different now and what isn't, let's get really clear on that. After God reveals something, many of us immediately start scanning our lives and asking, okay, so what should look different now? And that's a fair question, but it's also where we often attach expectations that God never actually placed on us. We assume revelation should come with immediate visible change, less struggle, more confidence, clearer direction, and a stronger faith. And when then those things don't show up right away, we start to assume that something's wrong. If you take nothing else from this episode, take this. Revelation doesn't always change your circumstances. It changes your awareness, and awareness is quieter than we expect. What actually changes after revelation is your posture, your honesty, not just with others, but with yourself, and your willingness to stay present instead of hiding. You'll notice patterns that you used to ignore. Maybe you'll pause where you used to react, and maybe you'll feel conviction earlier. That's growth. For me, I didn't even know I was changing. To this day, I can't even pick the moment where I stopped people pleasing as a default. I just know how I respond today and how I responded years ago, and they are not the same. I actually have this really strong disgust when I think back at how I was. And I think it's because that slow, intimate process with Jesus was forged through an active relationship with him. I didn't have to dwell on my faults because I was dwelling in the transformation. But it's not that I'm a different person. I am still the same heart that just now makes better choices. What doesn't change in this is our worth. God doesn't love us more because we're more aware. He doesn't withdraw because that we're still learning. And our humanity doesn't suddenly just disappear because truth showed up. God is not surprised that growth takes time. And so, if anything, revelation often makes us feel more aware of our limitations before we feel stronger. And that doesn't mean that you're regressing. It just means that the fog is lifting. Transformation rarely feels like progress at first. It often feels like honesty without resolution. And that's absolutely okay. God reveals things to deepen dependence and not demand perfection. He's not asking you to perform growth. He's inviting you to practice presence. So if you're living with more awareness, but not more answers, maybe more honesty, but not more certainty, more sensitivity, but not more confidence, don't panic. You are not behind. You're just still becoming, and becoming is slower, it's quieter, and far more sustainable than pretending you've already arrived. But you're not becoming somebody new. You are just becoming someone truer. The goal of revelation was never about perfection. It was about presence and presence with God. If God has revealed something to you recently and something uncomfortable, something tender, something you can't unknow, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not failing because you don't know what to do next. You are not behind because the change feels slower than you expected. And you are not disappointing God because you're still figuring out how to live honestly without hiding or performing. Revelation was never meant to be a finish line. It was an invitation. It's an invitation to stop pretending, an invitation to stay present, and an invitation to walk with God without the mask, even when you don't know who you're becoming yet. In that space, the in between, the unpolished, the not yet resolved, is not something to rush through. It is holy ground. We tend to think freedom should feel loud and obnoxious, but more often, freedom feels like steadiness, which is wildly disappointing when you were expecting fireworks and instead just got emotional maturity. It feels like choosing honesty without panic, and it feels like letting God stay close instead of trying to clean yourself up first. So, if you're tempted to overcorrect, to hurry your healing, or to prove that you're doing it right, let this be your permission to slow down. God is not timing your transformation with a stopwatch. He's not asking you to become impressive, and He's not waiting for you to arrive. He's walking with you right where you are in the middle of awareness, learning, and becoming. And maybe the most faithful thing that you can do after God reveals something isn't to fix it or explain it or rush past it, but to just stay, to stay honest, to stay open, and to stay connected. Because you don't have to be finished to be faithful. You just have to be real. Before you move on with your day, I want to invite you into a simple challenge this week. Not a dramatic one, not a checklist, and definitely not something you have to post about. Just this: notice and don't fix. At least once a day this week, when something rises up, a reaction, a habit, a thought, a feeling, instead of correcting it or judging it, just pause and name it. Not out loud, not to anyone else, just something between you and God. Something like, hey, God, I noticed this. Or I see this thing coming up again. Or this habit is still here. No solutions, no promises, no pressure to change it, just honesty. Because awareness is often the first form of obedience, and presence is sometimes the most faithful response that we have. If you want to take it one step further, you can ask God one quiet question. What are you inviting me into here and not away from? And then let that be enough for now. You don't have to rush your healing. You don't have to explain your process, and you don't have to rebuild a mask just because the old one's coming off. God is not intimidated by your in-between. He's present in it. Now, if any of this was helpful, share it with someone who's living in the quiet middle space right now, not to fix them, but just to remind them they're not alone. And as always, thank you for being here, for showing up honestly, and for choosing to faith it instead of fake it. Hey, glad you're still here. One more thing for you. I wanted to make things easier for us to connect and for you to have one place that you can go for all the latest stuff that's happening with the podcast. So now you can go to faithitpodcast.com and see all the latest episodes, write a review, email me, and even join our newsletter that will update you on any new and exclusive content. Spotify is always the best way to listen and view the podcast, but for everything else, go to faithitpodcast.com.